Nier Automata came out in 2017 and is seen as a big success, selling way over expectations and getting a great reception. It also served as a little redemption story for the director, Yoko Taro. Here's my review on Nier Automata. Nier Automata is an open-world hack-and-slash game developed by Platinum Games and published by our good friends who make them Final Fantasy games, Square Enix. The game though doesn't have the greatest behind the scenes, however, and this is where the director comes into play. Yoko Taro in the past has directed games like Drakengard 1, not 2, 3, and the original Nier. Were the games good? Well, they did get a nice following due to some themes and some story elements, but besides that, you could say they had issues everywhere else. Music is good though. His games did not have the best of luck when it came to stuff like reviews, as they were hampered down with various problems like low budgets, limited resources, and not the best development teams. Doesn't help that Nier and Drakengard 3 didn't do the best either. Honestly, the fact that Nier Automata was even greenlit at all is amazing considering the issues. This game though didn't have Caveat or Access Games as its dev. Nope, Platinum Games instead came in for the development. Platinum Games are known for games like Bayonetta 1, Bayonetta 2, Metal Gear Rising Revengeance, and more. Let's just say having them as help will make a big difference. Yoko Taro was in charge of a team famous for its fun gameplay, energizing battles, crazy moments, and actually having a good frame rate unlike this. I really don't know how they pulled that one off. With all this set in stone, we now come to Nier Automata, and safe to say that it didn't have the problems of the past. Now with the history out of the way, let's get into the game itself. As a little disclaimer, there will be no major spoilers here, so don't worry. The story of the game starts during the 14th Machine War in the year 11,945, many years after the first Nier game. You play as Yorha Units 2B and 9S, who are in a group of combat-enhanced androids who have to defend the Earth from seemingly endless amounts of machine lifeforms from taking over, because aliens had invaded a while back and now have new ways of taking out everything and everyone. They also took out a bunch of people during the invasion, so we gotta take them out. And this is where Yorha comes into play. Good thing is, the last bits of humanity managed to find a safe place to stay, that place being the moon. Considering that this is the 14th war, you would think it might be easier than the last, but that is definitely not the case. So it's up to 2B, 9S, and A2 the SAS Master to prevent the 14th war from going down and instead taking out a new advanced machine threat. While this is happening, they may also find out more about themselves and the world they are in. This may sound easy, but it's not at all, and I give this game's story a lot of credit with how it's presented and how it's not a simple A to B kind of thing. This leads into how the story is presented. Yoko Taro is known for his different style of storytelling compared to most, and it works here. You start off in Route A and you go through it and all its fun details and stuff. It's a good time. Once it's done, however, the game is not finished, despite how it might look finished. You still have more story stuff to do. So even if it seems like nothing much has changed, it's okay, because as you keep going, you may see stuff that you wouldn't have seen beforehand. It's also interesting how when you start a new route, the beginning follows a similar formula where you go in and engage small machines and then have to take a big one with some story stuff mixed in here and there. Then after this, you get introduced to the open world. Different perspectives of certain events are an important thing in the story as well, so keep this in mind when going through. Now, Route A and Route B follow the same narrative where you see the same events but from other perspectives, where in A, you play as 2B, and in B, you play as 9S. Route B is regarded as a tough one. This is of course opinion-based, which is fair, and I will not deny that Route B was not my favorite when playing it the first time, but going back to it actually made me appreciate some of the brilliant stuff that goes on, and more importantly, the subtlety of some of its story stuff. Does Route B come off as repetitive? Again, that can be debated, but the story stuff here, just like in Route A, is really good. I also think what helped out was getting to play as 9S, who has a certain ability you can use, but more on that later on. When it comes to Route C, this is where the story is expanded and it continues from Route A and Route B. It's essentially the second half of the game, and just as a little thing, I adore this route. Again, not saying anything in terms of spoilers, but the game does have stuff go down, and it's something else, I tell you. Totally trying not to cry here. The point is, the story does have depth to it, and the best part is that it has intrigue. When going through it, you will question certain things and wonder if that decision was the best one or not. There is a lot that gets thrown at you, especially at the start, but as it goes, you can find answers to even the smallest of things. The structure of the story is unique, that's for sure. Also, emotions are prohibited, so that is a thing to remember. Now, something that helps the story is the world building of the game. As mentioned before, Nier Automata is set on future Earth, and as you can see, yeah, lots changed here. The environments you explore are visually great and unique. You go to places like a forest, a desert, some cave parts, and more. What I love about the world is the fact that every place has a good reason to be here, and the areas themselves have lore to them. That leads into one of my favorite parts of the game, and that is the fact that virtually everything ever has some kind of backstory / lore. This goes with the locations, characters, and even weapons, which we will talk about later on. It helps that the game is a sequel to the original Nier, so there might even be a few references here and there. Though saying this, if you play Automata first and don't know the references, that's okay, as they are more subtle. There is a ton of lore in the previous games like Nier and the Drakengard series that do lead up to Automata, but starting here is okay, so nothing to worry about there. You can jump into Automata's story first and you'll be good. One of my favorite parts of the game are the character interactions. As you begin the game, you will play as 2B and 9S who have their moments of brilliance, and let's just say it's great. Having them talk back and forth about the mission objective they are following is nice, but what really works here is, well, the fact that they have a ton of dialogue, period. Yes, some of it is only in text like with talking with the merchant, but there is a ton of depth to this dynamic. I know I'm giving a lot of praise, but it's true. I only mentioned 2B and 9S as dynamic, but there are so many others in the game that are great, like 2B and 6O, who by the way is adorable as heck. We have A2's whole thing, which is later on, but that has some good stuff. We also have the pods, who are shockingly great. I only say shockingly because when you first see them, you don't think much of them, but they play a role in the story, which is nice. These are only a few. There are a ton that I could mention, but let's just say that the interactions between characters is one of the best parts of the game and is a highlight of it. Now let's get into the gameplay, and we have a lot here. Starting off with how you progress. You have main story missions, which you do to advance the plot, and you have side quests. With both types of these, you either go to a location or talk with an NPC. The good thing here is the game does give you distinction between the main ones and the side ones, so you don't have to worry about confusing the two types. A big giveaway of it being a main one is if there's a cutscene that plays following like a boss fight or another scene of importance. Another way, of course, is the data transmissions where the characters talk about the situation and what to do next. Also, the map in the game shows which ones are more story-based. The map itself is pretty good as it gives you a bunch of unique and distinct icons which tells you what is what, so it's useful, which is nice. The main missions are the ones that you want to focus on when starting, as it will unlock new areas to explore, which then means more missions in general. The missions themselves are varied and do change frequently. Some missions are getting items, taking out robots, passing information from one person to another, exploring a new area for intel, and more. Usually whenever these are done, an event takes place which can either be minor or major world-changing. This is essentially how the main missions work, and thankfully, it doesn't get repetitive, which I have to give credit for. The good thing to mention is when going through the main story or even just exploring, you can quick travel to various points on the map. Of course, at the start there won't be as many points, but as you progress, they will unlock, which means you won't have to worry about traveling like 30 miles to the next part of the mission only to go all the way back. I am so glad this is a thing. Something else to note is that the game is open world, which means you can do whatever you want before certain other things. So if you want to do random things, you can, whether that be just exploring, taking out robots, fishing, messing around the bunker to find secrets, and so on. Seriously, you can do a lot in this game. As you'll be playing the game multiple times, it is noteworthy to note that the mission structure stays the same, and this goes back to the different perspectives. But that's more on the main missions with story stuff. As strange as it may seem doing certain missions again, at least some of them are really cool, and the ones that may seem like a drag, they might have something extra in them which you can find. One of the game's best features is that when going from route to route, you keep all your equipment/items you obtained beforehand, so anything you use can still be used in the next route, which is an awesome feature. I mean, can you imagine if you had to find everything again like loot? Oh dear. Other stuff also gets transferred over, like skills, levels, so you don't have to worry about any potential grinding. I understand that some may like grinding, but me personally, I'm glad that there isn't really much grind at all. It helps keep the game paced pretty good. The missions are one thing, but we have to talk about the core gameplay itself, the fighting parts of the game. As mentioned earlier, this is a hack and slash game where you perform attacks on enemies in order to take them out. The combat itself is mainly on speed, combos, and dodging. Almost reminds me of a certain series Platinum has made before. There are different types of combat itself, so let's start with the on-the-ground melee. I love the melee stuff here. You don't necessarily have a big combo list like in other games like Bayonetta, but they make up for this by having other mechanics. You do have basic hits and stronger hits depending on your weapon set, but while in combat, you can switch to your other weapon set to do other moves to keep the combos flowing. Does one have to do this every time? Not really, as honestly, button mashing can work fine here. It's more of a style thing with the weapon set switching, if you know what I mean. Sometimes you want to be fancy. Doing this move is good and all, but there is a big mechanic that should be used in order to keep a decent flow while not losing the battle. This of course being the dodge. The dodging in this game is great as you can do it at any time, but if you time it right, you get rewarded with a counterattack. You can launch enemies into the air, you can do a strong attack, or you can use your pod for a nice damage boost. Honestly, the pod one is my favorite. It's amazing. If you don't feel like counterattacking and the enemy is still trying to hit, you can dodge multiple times, so there are choices here. The great thing about the dodge is the fact that there's an indicator that lets you know, hey, this enemy is about to do a big hit. When you see this, that is the cue to dodge. One part to add to the dodging that will help out is just simply running around. You go pretty fast in the game, so try not to stand around in one spot and you'll be good. Now in the combat there are a few special moves that you can do if you want some style points, and I'm curious to know how many people didn't know these moves existed, because I was one of them. One of the moves you can do is the launcher, and it's very much a Devil May Cry move where you launch an enemy into the air and you can do your fun combo stuff there. There is also a helm breaker equivalent depending on your weapon, so you can slam them down after launching them. If you're wondering the button input for this, it is jump and heavy attack at the same time. Might take a few tries due to the timing, but once you get it, you'll love experimenting with it. The other special move is where you lunge yourself while holding onto a pod and kicking the heck out of the enemy. This one may not seem like much, but if you want a cool combo ender, this is not a bad choice at all. This input is the pod attack and jump. Now let's get into the other big mechanic when doing melee combat, and that is the pods. When using the pods, there will be tons upon tons of shooting. And yes, balls as well. No, seriously, the amount of projectile balls that will be trying to take you down is just insane. The pod you use, though, can take out the lighter ones, whereas melee attacks take out the darker ones, so remember this when they're going after you. When using the pod, you will be mainly shooting, like, a lot. So much, in fact, that you'll probably hold down that button for what seems like minutes on end. Might as well get tape or something, because you will use it the entire time, almost. The best part about this is that the pods have unlimited firing, which means you don't have to worry about ammo. I mean, it is the future, so that's a thing. Alongside just normal firing, there is the secondary weapon that the pod can use. When you start the game, you use a massive laser beam, which on the surface, one may think it's not the best, but as you go on, you realize you can probably use this during the whole game and you will be fine. It's that good, and the fact that you get it at the start is great. There are other pod weapons that you can get in the shops, and they have their own uses, but these starting ones are, for me, the most balanced and work the best in a lot of scenarios that the game throws at you. It's notable as well that certain fights can be like 70% pod, 30% close range attacks, so remember to hold down that shoot button. Something that will help with both the melee and pod attacks is the lock-on. Yes, the lock-on feature is here and helps when focusing on one enemy, or even just getting the camera on a better angle. A good place where you can practice this is the arenas, which even though they are behind DLC, it's in my opinion worth it, as it's a good challenge to try and get through all of them while testing out your skills. It has a lot of motivation to it, if you know what I mean. The other side of combat in Automata are the parts where you fight on the flight unit and fly around in areas that a battle is taking place. Now, if you thought the projectile balls were tough before in Melee, well, here in the flight sections they are even tougher. Here you are usually going from point A to point B, and it's automated so you won't have to worry about crashing into a tree or something, so the only real focus is taking down the machines that appear on screen. These sections are mainly just taking down everything until a cutscene plays and rinse and repeat. On occasion you may have to take out weak points on a big enemy, but it's rare with that scenario. Once again, here you have the shooting, which you'll be practically doing every second. You have melee attacks, which are pretty decent, but the best attack here is the big missile attack. This one does have a cooldown after usage, but it's great as it does a ton of damage. And yes, in these segments you can dodge as well. Now if I'm being honest here, some of these segments are okay, but some just feel too long. It's either too long or there's just too many of them. I know this will be based on opinions, which is fair, but to me, sometimes I just feel like wanting to skip them. Again, that's a me thing. I will admit this though, a lot of the direction and the imagery in these sections are very detailed and look nice, so I can take that positive from it at least. When you're controlling 9S, he has an exclusive mechanic where he can hack into enemies, which transfers the combat into a hacking minigame. It's a top-down, and you control the arrow, which can shoot lasers. Of course, this minigame has tons of variations depending on the enemy you are hacking. It's also worth knowing that the hacking minigame isn't just for 9S. 2B and A2 also have parts where they will have to do the minigame as well, though 9S is the only one that can initiate the minigame, whereas the other two have more story-related hacking minigames, bosses being the big ones. I give this a lot of credit because there are so many different scenarios, even the ones that are repeated end pretty quickly so you get right back into the action. A few of the minigames might seem tough, but this is a case of doing it more makes it so much easier. Even the tough ones can be made easy after just a few tries. Remember when in these hacking parts you just have to take out the black shapes, and when that's done, you get back into the action. The best advice for this is dodging around the enemies, like a rotation of sorts, since all you can do is just move and shoot. Plus you can only get hit 3 times or you lose, so dodging here is crucial. Also, I would like to say that I love these hacking minigames because whenever they happen, the music in the background turns 8-bit and some of it is really good. The hacking minigames overall are a nice feature and even help during story parts. Plus they have a dedicated arcade mode for this, so if you want to test yourself to see if you can beat it, then go for it. Normal combat is of course the main focus, but at the end of the day, Automata has JRPG elements like a level system, which means the more you take out enemies or doing side quests, the more powerful you get with level ups. Now the good news is the game is not complex with its elements starting out, and you can, if you know what you're doing, easily break certain parts of the game. There isn't anything like a skill tree here, instead there are chips. These chips you can find throughout the game in locations or going to a shop person to buy them. There are different types of chips that you can get, like attack-focused ones, defense-focused ones, and support-focused ones. So if you want to be able to tank a bunch of hits, you can do this, or if you want to be a glass cannon, this is also an option. With the chips you can customize to whatever you want on your character. If you're unsure on what to use, there are presets that you can try out. There are tons of different chips that you can use and each have their own different abilities, like charging heavy attacks or just increasing health. Again, those are only 2 I mentioned, but there are so many that you can experiment with. I'll give you one that's a favorite of mine, the Shockwave chip. This has it so melee attacks have a little wave that can affect targets at decent range while also being great at close range, so that's another one you could use. This is a brilliant mechanic that got added to the game, as even though it might seem minor, these can be game changing and will help the experience as you progress. Also, I highly recommend getting those storage chips because you can use more chips then in the future. Now when going through the world and beating machines, you will notice that they drop stuff like funds and items, and it's important to pick that up. With funds, you are able to buy items and have the required amount for weapon upgrades. There are vendors that you can buy items from, and with certain loot you obtain, you can sell the loot to get a lot of funds to then buy the items. If you're wondering what the best loot is, well, it's usually loot that doesn't have to be involved in any weapons upgrades. Or just sell a ton of machine cores, because oh my god, they sell for so much and you get so many of them. It's kind of crazy thinking about it. One item that's important, especially if you're going through the game for the first time, are the healing items. Throughout the game you will get hit, and getting hit sucks, especially if you get hit into other enemies' hits, so having healing items at your disposal will help out. There are small, medium, and large ones that you can get, and for a while you only need the small and medium, but large ones will help out the most, so whenever you can, go for the large ones. It's always a good thing to have a lot of healing items, so once you get the funds, you can buy a ton of them. Something to note, by the way, if you don't like going to the menus often in battle, you can hit down on the D-pad and it brings up a little hotkey-like menu where you can use the items in the middle of combat. I mentioned how you can get items, but you can also get weapons throughout the world. Some weapons can only be bought, whereas some can only be found in certain areas, which encourages exploration as they can be in hidden spots. Some of them look really cool, by the way, so I would recommend at least trying to find a few, as it will vary up the gameplay, and honestly, you might be amazed at what you can find. With these weapons, you can upgrade them throughout the game as long as you have the right materials for it. The good news is, the game actually mentions what parts you need if you end up upgrading them. Upgraded weapons give better attacks and some nice bonuses. As mentioned earlier, you can do side quests, and some of these are great as they provide some lore and world building. To a degree, I even question why they weren't just part of the main missions, but the point is, doing the side quests will help out a lot as you get items and experience. The start of the game is honestly the best time for side quests, but this does bring up something else that's important regarding them. Some of them are only available at certain points, so be aware of this just in case you still want to do your favorite one. Also, some quests are only available depending on who you play as. Thankfully, they mentioned this in the chapter select menu once you beat the game, so even if you missed one, you can go back. Oh, and yes, I didn't forget about the big thing. The characters in the game can self-destruct, and when you do this... oh. Yeah, that happens. Besides the obvious thing, the ability itself is pretty strong, but it can leave you open to attacks, so if you want to use it, look for proper timing. Something I have to give the game is the fact that the lore is just incredible. Before I mentioned how the game is connected to the Nier and Drakengard games, and while that's good, they do great with even some of the smaller bits here. The weapons might be my favorite example, where literally every weapon you get has some backstory to it. By the way, when upgrading weapons, more of the weapon's story appears, which is nice. The locations have tons of lore to them, but even the little stuff in those areas have lore as well. Going through the inbox even has some stuff that isn't really said out loud. It's subtle, but it adds that little bit to the game that I love. Even talking with NPCs gives you some insight as to what's going on or what has happened over time. There is a lot more that I can mention here, but let's just say that the lore of Automata is one of the best features of the game. There is so much to find and explore that it could literally take many hours to find everything. And keep in mind, I didn't even mention anything regarding the second half of the game because there is more. To me, it speaks volumes when there are full-on dedicated videos talking about every piece that can be found and connected. Let's get into a specialty of Yoko Taro's games, and that is the endings. Don't worry, there's no spoilers here, not to worry. There are a ton of endings in the game, a whole alphabet worth of them, so like 26. And even though it's a lot, you don't have to worry that much about them. 5 of the endings are the main story ones, aka the ones where once an ending is done, there's still a main story to do. The rest of the endings happen with certain choices that you make throughout, and they end up being what's called joke endings. I mean, they roll the credits super fast to the point where you most likely won't even have time to pause it. So it's not a problem if you get a joke ending. If anything, some of them provide great meme material. These joke endings can technically happen at any time since, well, there are a lot more joke ones than main story ones. Although saying this, some of the joke endings are kind of hidden, whereas some you can find by accident. Since there are 26 endings, if you plan on finding all of them, the only stuff I will say is, if you go another way than where you are supposed to go, you might find something. That's honestly all I can say when it comes to giving a hint. The endings bring out a lot of replayability and are a good way of seeing some what-if scenarios. Also, feels are a thing I should let you all know about just in case, cause things happen. Speaking of feels, let's get into the soundtrack of the game, cause do I have a lot of stuff to say. Nier Automata has a great soundtrack, tons of variety, and they all hit perfectly. You got some like the Forest Kingdom, which technically has 3 versions to them. All the versions are good to listen to. This is for a lot of the OST in the game that have different versions as well. We even have stuff like End of the Unknown, which at first may seem like it's from a different game, but that is not the case as it was made for this one. If I'm being honest here, I could gush about this soundtrack for many minutes, but to keep it short, This soundtrack is amazing and I love listening to it, both when playing it and on my own. What Nier Automata shows is that when a director is given good tools and freedom for creative, the project will relish in success. Not to say the game is perfect, but given the track record, this game is a massive success. It hit all the right points it needed to, it took the Drakengard and Nier franchise to another level, and it showed a completely different way of storytelling to a more modern audience. I love this game. For a long time, this was in my top 3 games, and it's still in my top list because, of course, other games came into the list, but I love it. The storytelling, the gameplay, and the soundtrack all hit super well, and I adore it. It's a very special game to me. At the end of the day, it is a beautiful masterpiece to me, and it was well worth it. Just want to say thank you all for watching the review. I adore this game, and I am very proud to have shared it with you all. If you want to see more discussions/reviews on games past and present, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want updates on when new videos are coming out, follow them socials. Thank you for watching, and have a fantastic day.